I do recommend you watching the video entirely first before you get all of your things ready. What you will need today. First, you're going to need a small piece of watercolor paper. Not copy paper and not notebook paper, not sketchbook paper. The watercolor paper in the file folder. You're going to need the watercolor paintbrush, the watercolor oval paints, and you're going to need newspaper to cover your area, 2 small containers of water, table salt, rubbing alcohol, a Q-tip, and plastic wrap. This is how I want you to set up your paper. I want you to divide it into 4 equal squares or rectangles, and then the last rectangle I want you to divide into 2 equal parts. And I want you to label the top one salt, then the next one rubbing alcohol, plastic wrap, and then splatter wet, and then splatter dry. All right, I'm going to be working with you today to show you how to use some household items with your watercolors to make for more interesting designs for your summative painting. And this is going to go on the practice paper that came in the envelope. Not the envelope, that came in the file folder. This is one of the little pieces, so if you could make sure you to try as many of these techniques as you can. I'm going to be using just household table salt, a container of rubbing alcohol, if you have any rubbing alcohol in your bathroom or your medicine cabinet, and then a small piece of plastic wrap, and it's just gonna be really tiny, right? It's not very big at all. And then the other 2 techniques, you just need your brush and the paint. All right, so when we paint with watercolor, you do want to try to have 2 containers of water, and these can just be small little cups. Because we want one to stay clean, so when we paint with watercolor, we need to paint with clean water. And so it's going to be helpful to have a cup for your dirty water and then a cup for your clean water. And we want to make sure that our brush is clean when we go get the clean water so we don't contaminate it. Otherwise, you're going to need to dump it out and start over and have fresh, clean water to work from. So wet your brush, and then we want to wet our paper. So we're going to start with the salt technique. And we want to lay our brush down flat like a mop. We don't want to use the tip of our brush because that's not very effective. And we want to paint with water in our box labeled salt. And you also want to fill your brush with water and then squeeze a couple of drops of paint, like 2 drops of water into your paint to get it activated, to make it easier to paint with. And then you're going to swirl your brush in your color. If you're using violet, you want to not swirl very much. For the other colors, it's okay to swirl. All right, violet is a really strong color, so a little bit goes a long way. So now that I've swirled in my paint, now I'm ready to mop again with my paintbrush, dragging it left to right. Just going to kind of quickly get the sides, and while this is still wet, I want to put my brush down, grab my table salt, I'm using the whole container, and you're just going to get a little bit, and then we're just going to sprinkle that right into our wet paint, and we're just going to leave that alone, and then we'll come back and look at that later. All right, now that we're ready to move on to the next technique, make sure you clean your brush. So clean it in your dirty water cup so that your clean water side does not get contaminated. For the rubbing alcohol, I recommend that you use a Q-tip to dip. I've got a little container of rubbing alcohol here. But I happen to have a little eyedropper. You may not have an eyedropper, but you could use a straw to hold your finger over the top of the straw, or you could use a Q-tip to dip in, so you may have to get creative. All right, so with my clean water, I'm going to paint with water in the rubbing alcohol box, swirl in my paint to pick it up, and then mop again side to side to fill the area. All right, you need to have your rubbing alcohol nearby when you do this, otherwise it won't work. If the paint dries before you do the technique, it's not going to do anything. Okay, so it should look like this. You should see it repel and make little orbs. Okay, so you gotta have the rubbing alcohol nearby, otherwise it won't work. Okay, make sure your brush is clean. Get some clean water. Make sure your plastic wrap is ready to go. Paint with your water again. Mopping it side to side. Get your color. If your colors don't look very bright, it's okay to get more paint. If you feel like you need more paint to make the color look brighter, then get more paint. That's okay. And I gave you some extra sheets in case if you mess up and you need to start over. All right, put your brush down, get your plastic wrap, and then we're going to just lay it right in our paint. And then we're gonna just kind of push it around a little bit and try to get it to make some shapes underneath, some geometric shapes. All right, so if you can see the color difference, if you see the lighter parts and the darker parts, then you did it right. And if you leave it alone, it will dry like that and it'll kind of look like a stained glass technique. All right, so splatter wet and splatter dry. So I want to make sure our brush is clean. We've got clean water. On the side that says wet, we want to paint water. On the side that says dry, we want to do nothing. Okay, we don't want to put any water down first. We want to leave the paper dry. All right, and then I'm going to fill my brush up with water. I'm going to come over here and get some color, and then I'm going to hold my brush by the end, and then I'm going to tap on it to get it to splatter. All right, and on the dry side, you're gonna see that the dots stay exactly where you tell them to. And on the wet side, you're gonna see them spread out. I'm gonna clean my brush and do a different color now. Okay, so the dry side, the dots stay where you tell them to. On the wet side, they spread out. Okay, and now if you look closely, we can see that on the salt is starting to absorb the water in the paint, and it's starting to leave behind these kind of snow flurry looking shapes. You're going to leave this to dry for several hours. I recommend leaving it overnight if you can. Be sure to store your little painting of your techniques in a safe place. We don't want anybody in your family to take it or throw it away, because I do want you to photograph this and send it in. I'm going to switch this out. So this one is a little bit different. This is what we did here in class in person. The only technique we did that you did not do is this one called wet on wet, and it's basically like splatter paint, except you're just painting bigger areas. So I don't want you to think you missed out on something, because you didn't. It's the same exact technique as splatter wet, except we just painted big patches of color. That's all. Okay. All right, so when this is dry, you're going to take this over to your trash can and you're going to scrub off the extra salt. And then you will very carefully lift your plastic wrap and throw it away. And then I want you to glue. Hopefully you've got some stick glue. If not, maybe tape it down. Tape or glue your techniques into your next blank page of your sketchbook.